All right, would the state like to call its first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Sydney Alcott Walden to the stand. May I proceed?
Please.
Please state your name for the court, spelling the last.
Sydney Alcott Walden, Alcottwalden.
So, Sydney, tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm 66 years old. I'm a realtor, and I'm originally from Roxbury, Iowa, but I currently live in Walden Lake.
Well, Sydney, what type of work do you do as a realtor?
You know, buy and sell properties, work with investors, that sort of thing.
And what is your connection to the Alcott family?
I married my childhood sweetheart, Ashton Alcott, but sadly he passed away in 2009 because of lung cancer. Lois May was his twin sister, so I was her sister-in-law.
Well, what was Lois May like?
Lois May, she was a peach. She truly was. But she could be stubborn at times, especially when it came to the Emerson homestead.
Well, what do you mean by stubborn?
I've been trying to get her to sell for years, at least part of the homestead, but she thinks the value of the property is owning it, not selling it, so she always refused.
You mentioned that she has power to sell part of the homestead. How did she gain that?
Well, when Ralph Emerson passed away, he split the property amongst his children, and when they passed away, amongst theirs. However, Lois May has the power over what happens to the property.
And what is today's current standing for who holds the shares of Emerson Homestead?
When Ashton passed away, I inherited his 25%, and I have power of attorney over Ralph Jr.'s 50%. And now that Lois May is gone, I stand to inherit her 25% as well.
You mentioned 50% of Emerson Homestead belonging to Ralph Jr. How did you gain power of attorney over this?
He walked out on Devin when he was 16 years old. I don't know where he went or what he was doing, but a couple years ago I had my lawyers track him down in Florida of all places, and he agreed to sign over his power of attorney to me.
Well, moving on to October 15th, 2017. What was your morning like on that day?
It was a really beautiful day. Jalen, Lois May, and I went to church as we always do, and Devin tagged along. After church, Lois May and Mel Herman counted money as they always do, and I waited to walk her home.
And what did you do after church?
I had just received this extremely generous offer on buying property, and I wanted to discuss it with her. She, of course, refused, as she always does.
So, is this your first time discussing selling the property with Lois May?
Heavens no. I've discussed it with her many times over the years. There have been several offers made.
And would you mind telling us a bit more about this most recent offer?
Well, sure. It was by BW Development International, and it was extremely generous, but when I said she would never sell, he asked if an offer
Objection,
that...
hearsay.
Response?
Yes. Your Honor, I am attempting to lay the foundation for an exception to the hearsay rule 801 D2E, which is under the co-conspirator clause. I am trying to prove that Devin Emerson had contact with Beatty Weiss International.
Well, you cannot lay that foundation through hearsay testimony, through hearsay statements. So, and I don't believe that that foundation has been laid yet. So I'm going to sustain the objection. But if you can lay a foundation that the co-conspirator exception applies, we can revisit that.
Yes, Your Honor. Moving on, why do you believe it would be beneficial for Lois May to sell the Emerson homestead?
Well, you see, I don't live that close, so it would be nice if she could have some neighbors to keep an eye out on her when I'm not around. Plus, the money could use to help fix up that old house. I mean, it's a beautiful historical landmark. As a realtor, I can tell you it definitely is. However, it could definitely use a tune-up. Such a shame it was lost in that fire.
What did you do after your conversation with Lois May?
It got a little tense, so I decided to step outside to make some phone calls that I needed to make, and I saw Mel Herman spying on me.
Well, Sydney, after the phone calls, what did you do?
I went back inside, and Lois and I ate lunch before I headed out to my sister's in Roxbury.
And around what time did you end up leaving your sister's?
When they sat down for dinner, so it was around 6:30. Ashton, he never liked me driving after dark, and I suppose old habits die hard. I wanted to stop back by Lois May's just to patch things up.
And around what time did you arrive back to the homestead?
From my sister's house, it's at least a 30-minute drive, so it would have been just after 7 o'clock. I knocked on the door, but nobody answered, so I had assumed she'd already went to Jalen's for the baseball game.
And did you go over to Jalen's house to check if she was there?
I intended to, but when I got there was so much noise inside, and I really hate the commotion of sports. So I just headed home.
And around what time did you arrive home that evening?
It would have been around 7:40. I had an early closing on the house Monday morning, so I needed to get to bed.
And what did you do that night before going to bed?
Well, I was watching one of my favorite shows on HGTV, House Hunters. I can't remember where it was. Probably the Bahamas, perhaps somewhere in the Mediterranean. I don't know. Eventually I fell asleep and was awoken by a phone call.
And what did the voice on the other end sound like?
Very frantic, extremely concerned. I knew at once something was not right.
Did you recognize the voice at all?
It sounded a lot like Jalen.
And what did Jalen tell you?
Objection. I believe this question calls for hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, I laid the foundation that Jalen was uttering in an excited manner. Therefore, I would like to admit Jalen's statement in court through Sydney.
I think all we know right now is that the person may have just sounded excited. Is there any way you could lay just a little bit more foundation about how the excited utterance applies?
May I continue?
Please.
Thank you. So Sydney, when answering the phone call, what was the noise on the other end like?
I could hear sirens in the distance, and it just sounded very chaotic.
And what did who you believe to be Jalen tell you?
That there was a fire at the main house in Emerson Homestead.
And how did you react to this phone call?
I mean, I jumped in my car and I drove over there as fast as I could. I didn't have time to change out of my pajamas.
And what did you do while you arrived on the scene?
There were sirens and I saw smoke everywhere. Chief Hawthorne came over and asked me some questions, and I provided him with a sketch of the property that I've been using with investors.
And how else were you involved in this investigation?
Well, when I found out that the fire had been intentionally set, of course I allowed Chief Hawthorne and the investigators to check both my houses and my car. We need to find out who did this.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, we have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Alcott Walden, you testified that the house was lost, but in fact, only the kitchen was damaged. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
But you weren't interested in the house. You were interested in developing the 850 acres surrounding the homestead. Isn't that correct?
Well, I mean, yes, because Lois May needed somebody to watch after her.
In fact, you wanted to turn those acres into a resort,
I suppose.
with paying guests, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Now, you and Lois May both had 25% of Ralph Emerson's estate. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And Ralph Jr. had 50%.
Yes.
But when Ralph went to Florida, you had power of attorney over his 50%.
He really didn't want it. Clearly, I mean, he ran off.
So in effect, you controlled 75% of the estate.
Yes, but Lois May still had power over what happened.
And you could not do what you wanted with the land because she had a life estate.
Yes, I mean, I was looking out for her benefit, but there was nothing I could do without her consent.
She was adamant about not selling the property.
Yes, she really truly believed that owning the property was the most important thing.
Now, you received an offer of over $5 million from a real estate developer in Chicago.
That is correct.
In fact, you were offered a 3% commission worth over $150,000.
That's how being a realtor works. You get commission for helping buy and sell transactions with property.
Did Devin control any of the estate?
Well, I mean, he would have eventually inherited his father's share, but since I had power of attorney, who knows what would have happened.
Now, Devin lived with Lois May, isn't that correct?
Yes, but when he returned, he just hung out in the Ralph Jr. house without asking and without paying rent.
She was quite generous to him.
She was, but she was that way with everyone. She would have accepted anyone.
Did you live rent-free on the Emerson homestead?
No, I did not.
Now, when Lois May died, you inherited her 25%.
I was her closest living relative after her sister, as her sister-in-law. So, yes.
And did Devin Emerson inherit any part of her share?
Well, no, because he is, at best, she was his great aunt, so it's pretty distant.
So now, in effect, you control 100% of the estate, and you can finally get that big real estate deal.
I don't know what will happen after all this is over, but I guess if you want to be technical, then yes.
So you are the only person who stands to benefit financially from Lois May's death.
It's hard to say. I wouldn't know who else was involved.
Did anyone else inherit Lois May's share?
No.
Did anyone else organize a multi-million-dollar real estate deal with the land that Lois May refused to sell?
I was only getting a 3% commission for selling.
Over $150,000, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And what about the $5.5 million for the actual property?
That would... yeah.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Sydney, would you mind telling us again why you believe having Lois May sell the homestead be beneficial to her?
Well, you see, I do not live on the property, so it is very hard for me to come at short notice if she were to fall down or need my help. It would be very nice if we could not sell all of the property, but at least subdivide it a little bit so people could live on the property and help her out.
Great. Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions at this time.
Recross?
No, Your Honor.
The witness may be excused.